He's going to call the election at 5:30 on Thursday afternoon. How would I know?
I'd put money on 21st of May. That'd be my punt.
I'm going to take a bet. I'll say the 14th.
That'll be in mid-May.
On the precipice of calling an election,
Obviously, this isn't our first rodeo.
come two highly anticipated post-budget polls.
Neither leader has stratospheric popularity ratings.
Take us forward, Mr. Sulu.
But in some good news for the captain,
I want to welcome everybody up here today.
the latest news poll shows the coalition has closed the gap in the primary vote. Labor's lead now 38 to 36%.
People were pleased with what they saw in the budget. I'd say to Anthony Albanese, the election hasn't even been called yet.
The bad news for the government, Labor is sitting pretty on two-party preferred. If the vote was held today, it would see an election-winning 5.5% swing towards Labor.
Guess what? Not rocket science here.
The results coming after a week of controversy for the PM, kicked off by this.
Morrison might profess to be Christian, but there was nothing Christian about what was done to Michael Toke.
The PM repeatedly denying that he racially vilified rival Toke in his 2007 pre-selection bid in the Sydney seat of Cook.
I've been very clear. I absolutely reject that as malicious slurs. It is outrageous.
The people who know Scott Morrison the best, who've worked with him the closest, have the lowest opinion of him and are least likely to trust him.
His defenders, again, out in force.
It's come out now because they're orchestrating a political hit.
He worked for me for 2 years when I was at Tourism Council. I never heard him use any racist terms.
Prime Minister Morrison has always treated me firmly and fairly.
So can the PM survive any more character attacks?
Here I am, standing strong, standing tall.
There is a lot to unpack here, and to help us through it, we've got Labor MP Tanya Plibersek and Liberal MP Katie Allen. Tanya, first question to you. The PM is calling these claims malicious slurs on the eve of an election. That's hard to argue with, isn't it?
Look, I think what's interesting about all of these claims is that they're coming from people who know and have worked closely with Scott Morrison. So there was Gladys Berejiklian, Barnaby Joyce, Connie Fierravanti-Wells, Julia Banks. It's a pretty long list of people on his own side of politics, Pauline Hanson, Jackie Lambie. But can I tell you, actually, it's not the thing that people most often stop me to talk about. They'll make their own minds up about the Prime Minister's character, but what people are saying to me is that life has got harder under the Morrison government. The cost of living's going through the roof, their wages aren't keeping up, and that's the thing, really, that most people want to talk about.
Katie, I appreciate the invitation Tanya's given me to talk about those issues, and we will through the campaign, but I feel like I need you to respond to that point that Tanya's making. I mean, if these are malicious slurs, they are coming from his own team. Doesn't that suggest that there's something very seriously wrong going on within the party or with him?
Well, you know, as Tanya would know, because we're coming into an election campaign and she's an old hand at this, it is mud-slinging season. And, you know, I think the issue is, and Tanya's quite right, we want to know what is going to be the best way forward for the country and who's going to deliver. And I know if I'm a dentist, I really care about, you know, how they're going to operate that drill. Not my views about them as a person. And so I think as we move into this election, it's going to be really important to know, you know, who is going to deliver going forward and what the record of delivery is for the coalition government. Okay. I might be a bit biased, but I think we've done a good job.
And I appreciate that, Katie, and I appreciate the point you're making that it's mud-flinging season, but you're kind of meant to fling it at the other team. There's a problem when you're flinging it amongst yourselves, isn't there? And it's not just about character, that's about whether or not this is a fit operation to run the country.
Well, you know, at the end of the day, politics is a very contested
defending
space.
the Prime Minister's character.
Sorry, Katie.
This is a very contested space, and we all know that when people get disappointed, they're often very passionate about their views. And when there's a win-lose situation, of course, people do, you know, have very strong words to be said. They know the impact of those words. So, look, you know, I'd have to say, if you look at the record of what the Prime Minister has delivered, I've always had a very strong relationship with him. I found him an extremely decent person to work with, and I'm very happy to back him in as our leader now and hopefully into the future.
OK, so you say the Prime Minister's delivered these things, he can stand on his record. Tanya did make the point before that people are saying that their lives have gotten harder, and that's probably borne out by statistics. Cost of living is difficult, wage growth has been anaemic. What exactly is it that your government and Scott Morrison's government has done or delivered about those things?
Yeah, well, we know that there's been a massive impact, firstly, of COVID on global supply chains and now with the situation in Ukraine. So we know that there's a lot that's, putting a lot of pressure on recent changes to the cost of living. And the best way to make sure that people have got more money in their pocket is to lower taxes. And that is actually the first thing that we did as a government in my term of Parliament, something I'm very proud of, was to deliver huge amounts of tax relief for millions of Australians. But right now, people are worried about things like their petrol prices, and we know with our significant decrease in the fuel excise of 22 cents, you can drive past you can go to your petrol bowser now and see already there's a big impact on the cost of petrol. But we need to also look at all sorts of aspects of cost of living, and that's what, when you look at our budget last week, you could see so many things in that budget to help the short-term issues that we're facing as we're coming out of COVID, as we're dealing with international security issues, and then going forward, having a plan to make sure that Australia can take advantage of the opportunities that COVID is, or the post-COVID economy is going to present. We need a strong economy for a strong and prosperous future.
That was very practiced. These claims, though, Tanya, are not going across, are not just quarantined to one party. So, Tanya, how much do you think the Kimberley Kitching bullying scandal has affected your party's standing with voters?
Amy, I'll talk about that in a minute, but I just really need to address what Katie said about stuff's got harder since Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is horrific, but life was hard for families before this conflict broke out. In the last year that we've got full year figures for, the average cost of living for a family went up well over $3,000. It's petrol, childcare, rent for the average family, well over $3,000. And wages are not just flatlining, they're actually going backwards. And you remember Matthias Cormann, before he went off to his job in the OECD in Belgium, he said why this is. He said, low wages are a deliberate design feature of this government's economic architecture. They have deliberately kept wages for ordinary families low while the cost of living's been going through the roof. And that's what people will be voting on this election. Amy, your question about Labor, all of us need to do better. People look at the federal parliament, they want us to behave with courtesy and common sense. Of course, we all need to do better. But we've got a Prime Minister who's got, half a dozen more people on his own side of politics calling him out. I think, if we're going to look at character, that's what people will be looking at.
But Tanya, I appreciate that point that you're making there. But I guess with the Kimberley Kitching story, what you saw there was a really, really big factional war taking place over pre-selection within the Labor Party. And there's an argument that what you're seeing on the coalition side is a similar sort of thing, factional dispute over pre-selection contests. Is there any substantive difference, really, between the pyrotechnics that we saw within the Labor side of politics and what we're seeing on the coalition side? Are you prepared to say and explain to us why it is that your side's muck is better than the other side's muck?
So, well, again, what I'd say is it's not the thing that people are raising with me when I'm out campaigning. They're raising the fact that their life has got harder under the Morrison government. But I would say this, when you look at the Prime Minister, what people are saying about him, you've got a long line of people. Gladys Berejiklian, when she was talking about the bushfires, even Barnaby Joyce, the now Deputy Prime Minister, has called the Prime Minister a liar. Former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull, Julia Banks talked about him as a bully. This is a long line of people over quite some time. Yes, pre-selections do get willing and they do get quite nasty sometimes, and I wish they didn't. None of us enjoy that aspect of politics. It gets pretty high conflict at times. But here you've got a Prime Minister that's got former Prime Ministers, Premiers, his own Deputy Prime Minister, like a long queue of people calling him out.
Thank you so much for your time. We do have to leave it there. Thank you again.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Good to talk to you.